Revolutions Per Minute is a weekly radio show from the New York City chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America. Recorded live at WBAI 99.5 in Brooklyn every Wednesday at 9 p.m. RPM's about doing the work to build a democratic socialist future. Each week, hear the latest news, analysis, and organizing experience from the minds and hearts of activists fighting every day in New York City. Join the movement at socialist.nyc.
Yo, what's good, New York? This is Jack Devine, he, him pronouns, and you are listening to Revolutions Per Minute live on WBAI. We're a socialist radio show and podcast for members of the New York City Democratic Socialists of America. DSA is the largest socialist organization in the United States, with 85,000 members nationwide, and NYC DSA is its biggest chapter. We are run by our 7,000 plus members and organizers who are working together to build democratic socialism in all 5 boroughs. What a day. History is on the move. Reactionary Trump supporters seized the Capitol building in a fascist show of force to declare the election results illegitimate. What does this all mean? RPM host and anti-fascist special correspondent Amy Wilson joins us to discuss. This, of course, does not occur in a vacuum. We've been living through a brutal and deadly pandemic, and we've lost so many people this year to so many different tragedies, including socialist intellectual Leo Panitch. We'll share some clips from his presentation to the North Brooklyn DSA branch on the importance of building a culture of socialist political education. Later in the show, DSA National Political Committee member Justin Charles will join us to talk about the importance of working class organization for the struggles ahead. But first, the headlines with Simone Norman.
In an emergency legislative session, the State Assembly and Senate passed an extension of the residential eviction moratorium, suspending proceedings for 60 days and allowing most tenants to apply for relief through May 1st. A number of new state laws went into effect starting January 1st, including an expansion of paid family leave. Public advocate Jumaane Williams will nominate Housing Justice for All coordinator and NYC DSA organizer Sia Weaver to serve on the City Planning Commission. Mayor Bill de Blasio says that the city will administer 1 million doses of the COVID-19 vaccine by the end of this month. Governor Cuomo issued an executive order raising the penalties on providers that disregard the vaccine prioritization order, which critics say will slow the vaccine's distribution. And the federal aid package passed last week includes $4 billion for the MTA, which will prevent the worst layoffs and service cuts proposed, even as the agency looks for new sources of revenue amid the pandemic. And in election news, Scott Stringer, Eric Adams, Sean Donovan, and Maya Wiley lead the race for endorsements in this June's mayoral primary. And Max Rose has decided not to run for New York City mayor.
Our headlines are brought to you by The Thorn, an incredible weekly newsletter by NYC DSA Electoral Working Group, covering local politics and radical activism. Subscribe at thethorn.nyc. So, we had one plan for our show today, and then events have escalated very, very quickly. I think many of the listeners to this station and to our show are well aware of the threat posed by Trump, by the forces of reaction, and really an emergent fascist movement in this country. And today was a really dangerous escalation as a large number of right-wing protesters seized control of the Capitol building with basically no resistance from the police. Videos show that some of them actually basically let them in the door. And so we're about to talk with Amy Wilson, who has really done some excellent coverage and analysis of fascism in the U.S. on this show before. But first, we have a kind of we put together some clips, some audio from the seizure that happened today, and we want to roll that for you right now.
I am on the top step of the Capitol building with everybody. You can come too.
We're in. I'm trying to hold back for you. Stop pushing, guys. Stop pushing.
Stop pushing. We did it!
Woo! We're in. We're in. Derek Evans is in the Capitol.
So we have followed protesters up the Capitol steps. Right now they've reached the Capitol front door. They're walking inside. Do you want us to follow them in? I'm comfortable with it.
Police are squabbling with protesters. Oh, there we go. And they just breached the Capitol again.
The doors just got open. Somebody cracked the door. Somebody broke in and opened the door for me. I don't know. All right, so the door's open. I get into the rotunda, and then I take my picture and do a few things, and I start heading down the hallway this way, and then all of a sudden I see the gas on the stairwell, so I'm like, yeah, and so, huh? How far did they make it? We basically took the whole building. Because there were people. No, I don't know about that. I don't. They chased me.
Ma'am, what happened to you?
I got maced.
You got maced.
By the police.
And what happened? You were trying to go inside the Capitol?
I made it like a foot inside, and they pushed me out, and they maced me.
What's your name? Where are you from?
My name is Elizabeth. I'm from Knoxville, Tennessee.
And why did you want to go in?
We're storming the Capitol. It's a revolution.
Thank you.
This has never happened before. Go! Come on! Go! Come on! What about that? That's right. Where's my turn?
Got an active shooter. Yo, there's an active shooter here. Get her down. Get the light. Flashlight.
Well, we had stormed into the chambers inside, and there was a young lady who rushed through the windows. A number of police and Secret Service were saying, get back, get down, get out of the way. She didn't heed the call, and as we kind of raced up to grab people and pull them back, they shot her in the neck, and she fell back on me and started saying she was fine, it's cool. And then she started kind of like moving weird, and blood was coming out of her mouth and neck and nose. And I don't know if she's alive or dead anymore.
And how did you get back out of the building?
Riot police came in and started ushering us out with their sticks.
Where did you enter the building and where did you exit?
Other side with the scaffolding. We tore through the scaffolding through flashbangs and tear gas.
Get out of here, guys.
So that was our sound from the insurrection, the seizure of the Capitol today in DC, the demands of these right-wing protesters is to basically to cancel the kind of limited democratic system we have and confirm that their hero Trump stays in power. And I think you had one of the protesters talk about revolution, but it's a bit flabbergasting to me to consider something that is about preserving the power of a billionaire racist president who represents the power structure in this country to be anything revolutionary. This is spectacle and violent spectacle on behalf of the kind of long history of domination. And there's a lot of things that have come to my mind, but I want to introduce Amy Wilson, who is one of our consistent and great host here on Revolutions Per Minute and kind of our special correspondent on anti-fascist struggle against fascism. So, Amy, thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Oh, hi. Good evening, Jack. Thanks very much for having me.
So, I mean, there's so much to say. We were talking earlier today that this is something that we were, shocked by the event. We didn't expect this, and I don't think people organizing on the left imagine that things would escalate this quickly. But we were also not surprised, just kind of considering both the trajectory in the recent years of the American right and kind of the long history of violence of the American right throughout U.S. history. But so I'll give you these questions, but really take with it as you want to go. What does today's seizure of the Capitol building in D.C. reveal about American fascism in 2021? How does it confirm what anti-fascist organizers and organizations have been warning about? And are there any mobilizations against the far right, this action, and their kind of increasingly open anti-democratic politics in the works?
Yeah, so those are great questions. And I do want to underscore what you just said for the listening audience, which is that, I don't think anybody woke up this morning and thought we were going to be sitting here at 9 p.m. talking about armed protesters storming the Capitol. This is really beyond what people had prepared for, or really in some ways were able to imagine, which might in and of itself be an interesting statement about the historic stability of American politics, that this is something that we have difficulty imagining happening in our country, whereas, of course, we've fomented similar events in many other countries, but that's outside the scope of tonight's discussion. I think that really, as an anti-fascist organizer and as somebody who is focused on opposing far-right mobilizations here and now, my perspective on it might be different than, say, an academic or somebody who's looking at this from a bigger picture or longer-term perspective. But what's been on my mind today, and what I've heard from comrades and other people who are interested in these issues, is that what happened today in DC really illustrates the importance of limiting the organizing terrain of the far right. Events like this, we know as left organizers, events like this don't come about overnight. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of people. It takes a lot of organization to get that many people to the Capitol, to make sure they all know where they're going, right? There are a lot of chartered buses, a lot of sort of the machinery that makes this work. And as we've talked about before on Revolutions Per Minute, when people think of anti-fascism, they do tend to think of its most visible expression, which is a street demonstration or a counter-protest, like we saw in DC today, or back in December. On December 12th, there was a big one in DC. We had them earlier in the fall in New York City. But those are really just one part of anti-fascism. And in my opinion, by the time it's gotten to that eruption, really, we're past the point where we would ideally want to be as anti-fascists. What anti-fascists want to do is stop the bus company from chartering a bus full of Proud Boys or people who can be demonstrated to be linked to the Proud Boys. What we want to do is stop hotels from booking rooms to these groups. And even a step before that, we want to make it so that it's socially toxic and socially unacceptable to express views, the misogynist, racist, xenophobic views that the Proud Boys and people who affiliate with them openly espouse. So, every time an event like this happens, it emboldens for a larger event. And usually, in my experience as an anti-fascist organizer, we might be talking about things on a much smaller scale, right? So we might be talking about a fascist incursion might be a Patriot Front sticker on a lamppost in Greenpoint that only somebody who knows what it means, knows to be intimidated or scared by. Anti-fascists keep an eye out for that. And they try to cover up a sticker, to even say that simple act of this symbol is not welcome in our neighborhood. Or it could be a smaller event, a smaller rally that's counter-protested. And every time those things go unopposed, it sets the momentum and sets the stage for a large thing like this to happen, because it's a successive series of, I can't think of a better word than emboldenings. So I think, looking out at the landscape after today, this is about as big of an emboldening as I can possibly imagine, right? They made it all the way to Nancy Pelosi's office and got out scot-free. So I think that anti-fascists and those who are our allies in the upcoming days are really on the hook now to stand up and now to say, this isn't going any further. Or as we say in anti-fascist culture, no passerán, they shall not pass.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great phrase. Also reminds me of Lord of the Rings, to lighten things up a little bit.
That was actually a direct reference. The J.A.R. Tolkien put that in as a direct reference too.
Oh, wow. I never knew that. It makes me feel better about some of the, like a lot of fantasy, the strange racial politics that are contained in the story. But I love Lord of the Rings and I always enjoy it regardless. So I'm really happy that there's, some anti-fascist stuff I can draw upon there too. So is Amy, before you hop up, is there anything that you want to add? And thank you for coming on in this last minute in this really, really crucial moment, because I think this is something that we are not going to be able to ignore on the left and something we have to organize against.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's just a couple more things that I want to make sure that our listening audience has heard tonight. And one of them is that many people have already noted the discrepancies in the policing that we saw today of the way these protesters were treated versus the way leftist and anti-fascist, anti-racist protesters have been treated for the last year and frankly years. And they've pointed out that this is a function of white supremacy and the political entanglement of white nationalism and xenophobia with law and border enforcement, which we did a whole wonderful show on, Revolutions Per Minute, at the end of last year. And although we may see police opposing Proud Boys and such, and although there's sort of a kind of natural schadenfreude instinct to think, oh, wow, this is great, we love to see it. Frankly, we don't love to see it. The police are not our friends, and we cannot lose sight of that reality as anti-fascists and as participants in a larger socialist project. Fascism will not be stopped by voting or by exercising the power of the state. It will be stopped by mass working class solidarity, and you can hang your hat on that. So I am aware of mobilizations in New York City that are planned for this upcoming Sunday. And I am aware as well of some counter mobilizations planned by anti-fascists for this weekend. And, especially given in light of today's events, I think we are going to see an upsurge of interest in these events. And I encourage those who are interested to look it up and see how they can get involved. Whether you're in New York City, whether you're in Long Island or an outer borough, we really need people to engage locally with anti-fascism, because that's really where it starts. It starts by saying, like I said a couple minutes ago, this racist sticker doesn't belong in my neighborhood. That's the first step. And I'd like to just leave the listening audience with something that I've been thinking about a lot today. It's actually a Zen saying that says the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, but the second best time is now. So I think the best time to stop what happened today in DC was 5, 10, or 15 years ago by opposing the rise of these dangerous ideologies that sort of culminated. But the second best time is right now, and it's not too late to stop it if we all work together.
That's such a great point, Amy, and thank you so much for coming on. We always want to hear your wisdom on anti-fascism, and that the kind of the quote that you just pulled up made me really think about how crucial working class organization is to combating this barbaric politics that we saw on display in Washington today, and that it's so crucial going forward for the movement to build up this power, because if we want to think about this historically, the the conservative movement has crushed working class organizations. Not totally, they still exist and they're beginning to fight back in a more militant way, but there needs to be more power and solidarity of the working class if we're really going to beat back this reactionary politics. So I just want to remind our listeners that you are tuning in to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM and streaming on your favorite podcast app. We've just been talking about the right-wing insurrection in Washington today, something that even caught those paying attention to the barbaric politics of the right by surprise. And we're going to shift into something that I think is highly related and will really help us understand how to actually struggle against this, the politics of the right, and why it's so crucial to think about things in the long term and not just have an accelerationist point of view, but rather something that is constantly about building up the power and capacity of the working class to organize and push for its own self-activity. And so we're going to roll to a clip from the Leo Panitch, who recently passed away, a great socialist intellectual. And here he's going to talk about the importance of kind of having this sort of political space in order to build up this type of working class organization. So let's roll that clip.
It's not so much a matter of getting Biden elected. It's primarily a matter of preserving political space so this type of socialist education can continue. What makes a difference between even the United States today as a bourgeois democracy and a capitalist dictatorship is not only, and maybe not even so much, repeated elections and competitive political parties. It is freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, above all, freedom of assembly in the context we're witnessing today, and freedom of association, and Trump's response to this wave of protests, which was to identify not only Antifa, but left-wing organizations, far-left organizations, was, in my view, directly intended to refer to you guys. And that has very much to do with what space could be closed down for socialist political education, or even anything short of that. Just the type of educational work, freedom of press work, freedom of speech work that's necessary, the really crucial thing, I think, of seeing the election as important in the face of these protests is precisely to make sure that what we will talk about the importance of socialist education, continued organization, how to sink roots in the working class, how to use whatever electoral credibility that getting Sanders, our revolution type candidates elected at state levels and local levels, et cetera, to link with working class struggles broadly defined, that all of that still be possible after November 2020. I think that one really needs to take seriously the parallels with the early 1930s in Europe, which we need to remember were based on, for the most part, not in Spain, but certainly in Germany and elsewhere, authoritarian leaders getting elected and then closing down immediately freedom of association and assembly. First of all, the unions were shut down before the communist parties were in Germany. So the link with socialist education and electoral politics isn't so much now about getting Sanders elected, and I didn't think it ever was. It is about creating more political space which you've already done, and you can do a lot more. You've already done discursively by making socialism a relevant word again, a believable word, I think a richer word in American political culture than it's probably been in a century.
So that was Leo Panitch from before he passed away, when he gave a presentation at the North Brooklyn DSA night school, and I think he's making some really, really crucial comments there about the need for fighting so we can preserve organization. Well, obviously, I think many of us recognize that we don't really live in a full and true democracy. There's also a difference between a society that has become fully fascist and crushes any form of working class organization, and a more liberal one where there is space to build that sort of power. And I think, well, he draws this parallel to the 1930s, and I think that's something that we should take in consideration, what happened in Europe during that time. And but I also think we have to really root ourselves and understand that there is an American tradition of fascism that is distinct and that arises from the settler colonial project, from the history and legacy of slavery, of Jim Crow, of the overthrow of Reconstruction that led to Jim Crow. You know, this may be the first time that the Capitol in Washington has been stormed since the British did in the War of 1812. But state houses have, like in Wilmington, North Carolina, have been stormed by white supremacists before to overturn governments that were committed to overturning or at least, somewhat combating white supremacy. So these are the sort of we have to really understand the particular conditions that we're operating in with the United States, the history that we have. And we're going to open the phone lines for just a couple minutes before we run to the next clip. And that number is 212-209-2877. Again, that number is 212-209-2877. So, yeah, I think when we're talking about what happened today, we can't just draw upon external forces. You'll see some really kind of what I consider a joke from maybe some liberals, like, oh, this is what Russia and Putin wanted, or people even saying this is not America. Actually, this is America in a certain of its form. That there is a long history of reactionary and fascistic politics, and that while I wouldn't call the conservative movement that's dominated this country for really the past 50 years necessarily fascist, it contained fascist elements that are really rising to the surface now that their anti-democratic project is being exposed for what it is. Do we have anybody on the line? Because if not, let's roll to Leo Panitch's next clip that really focuses on the importance of building working class organization to one, combat these forces of reaction, but really kind of build the society that we're looking for, that is kind of rooted in democratic control of the economy and just our lives. So let's roll that clip.
It's my view that what you guys have done is not unrelated to the tremendous diversity of these protests. I think that is an organic element in them. It's not something separate from them. And the crucial thing will now be to go forward in a strategic way that doesn't go back to the anarchist moment that really defined the anti-globalization movement all the way to Occupy. That is, that parties, looking at the failures and limitations of the communist parties and the social democratic parties, that parties did not fulfill their claim that they could be agencies of socialist transformation in the 20th century. So then there was this very strong orientation to changing the world without taking power. And that's not to say that those protests were unimportant. They were enormously important. And they reflected the very limited, in fact, hegemony of neoliberalism. They were proof that neoliberalism was nearly as hegemonic as some people claimed it was in the first decade of the 20th century, before the 2008 crisis. And the Occupy helped redefine class politics, or bring it back on the agenda with that very crude class map of 99 to 1. But it was very much an anarchist moment, which was hostile to party building. And I also think was, on the whole, pretty hostile to party building to the end, not so much of immediately getting into the state, as working class reformation. The role that parties have always played in making the working class itself into an agent of change, of forming it, giving it organizational capacity. So one doesn't know where this is going to go, but one really hopes that where it will go is to take this remarkable moment of protest in directions that facilitate further party building and working class formation. Now, that's easily said in the abstract. How you do it concretely is a whole other question.
You're listening to Revolutions Per Minute on listener-sponsored WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM and streaming on your favorite podcast app. Today, we've been talking about the right-wing insurrection in Washington and the need for socialist organization to build a better world so that we can't be constantly dealing with the domination and the threat of right-wing violence. But in order to, part of doing that is having the sort of media organizations that we need. You know, you may have been staring at your TV, MSNBC or CNN all day, where they were talking about how these people are anarchists, when no, anyone who has an understanding that these people are reactionaries. This is a totally different types of politics, but that's not what they're really trying to tell you on something like corporate media. So if you really want to contribute to an organization that is putting out the kind of analysis that we are today, become a WBAI buddy by going to WBAI.org. And then you become a recurring contributor, and you become part of this station, a listener member. This is more than just a network that you consume. If you are a BAI buddy and you give more than $25 a year, you become eligible in the elections to our local station board. So this is a democratic institution that is fighting back against corporate media and is really kind of trying to get this message of solidarity out into the airwaves. And so right now we are joined by Justin Charles, a comrade, a returning guest on Revolutions Per Minute, someone who has been part of North Brooklyn political education. We were just hearing from Leo Panitch, who's had given a presentation last year. And he's also a member of DSA's National Political Committee. Hey, Justin, how are you doing?
Good, all things considered, Jack. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on. And yeah, I mean, all things considered, I think has been the phrase of maybe the past 10 months, but especially so today. So, what's happened today has really risen this to the surface, but there's been a lot of things happening that have kind of put these questions in my mind. But why is it not enough to have the morally correct and popular position on issues? Why do socialists and the working class need organization to win a better world? And how does such organization prepare us to fight back against an increasingly brazen right wing?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think socialists, if it came down to us just being right, we'd have the world we want. But being right isn't the same thing as building power. And in order to build power, we have to facilitate. I'm getting ahead of myself, but we have to be able to compose what is a very disorganized working class, and compose it into something that understands itself as a class. And to do that is hard work. But I think what's required is that we facilitate opportunities for people to experience solidarity. I think a lot of the problem that we have comes down to people don't believe it's possible to have the kind of world they want, which leads to either people just sitting around or people just getting mad at each other on Twitter, or, you know, more destructive things like what we saw today. I think the importance of organizations like DSA or any organization that you know approaches what might be called a party form, and I hope DSA, you know, I think DSA is on its way to doing that, is create those opportunities, not necessarily create, but facilitate and push along those opportunities to experience solidarity. When your landlord is screwing over everybody in your building and not turn on the heat, and you know all sorts of stuff that goes on when you got a bad landlord, you organize with your neighbors and you make the landlord do what he's supposed to do. And in doing so, one experiences solidarity. That's just one example, but we need to be doing that at scale. And I think the only way that you do that is with a mass organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think you just put that very elegantly, particularly on this connection between these local struggles and having this wider organization that can kind of facilitate these struggles together and direct them towards a program. And we're experiencing, I feel like one of the great parts of like the Sanders campaign is it did set up like this sort of national program, and in this emergence of DSA as this sort of organization is another very encouraging development. And we're starting to see increasing struggles on the ground. So it's I think the real question for us going forward is how can we really, one, build up these organizations in our neighborhoods, stuff that you described like tenants unions, have a more robust labor movement that is organized in workplaces across the country, and have this militant organization, these various militant working class organizations connected in this broader movement organization. So I think this is something that we all have our eyes on for sure. And we're gonna roll to another clip from Leo Panitch. I don't know if I know you're very busy, Justin. So if you got to hop off, no worries. But we'd love to have you stick around for the phone lines opening up. But again, that's I know you got a lot going on, so I don't want to put any pressure on you that way. But let's roll to this third clip from Leo Panitch on the need to build dynamic socialist organizations at the base and have this also rooted in a sort of socialist political education. So let's roll that next clip.
Given the nature of the mainstream media, which defines politics in terms of getting people elected and then 2 years later getting them reelected, one of the most important things people you get elected need to become is socialist educators. They need to use the legitimacy they get from being elected, not primarily to pass legislation, although that's important, but they need to use the attention they get in the media to foster socialist discourse, especially at a local level. So in relation to what's now going on, one of the most important things that DSA members who have been elected can be doing would be to come down to the level of the protests and be speaking at them and to the mainstream media in them. Tony Benn, when he first got his nomination in 1951, asked what he would do as an MP. And he said, my first priority would be to make, educate, and keep socialists. That didn't happen with the social democratic parties in Europe. And the sense in which Sweden is not socialist has a great deal to do with this. Most of the big social democratic parties made the communist parties of Europe look sometimes very democratic. The Swedish Social Democratic Party has conferences every 3 years. I would send students to go do PhD theses on Sweden because everybody wants to look at Sweden. How do we, get that kind of egalitarian society? And urge them to look at the internal processes of the party. And they'd constantly be shunted off to do some study of policy, right? Never of what is the democratic process inside it. And those are very top-down organizations. And Swedes are justly proud of the infrastructure that the labor movement built, which has not, even though the Social Democrats were the ones who deregulated finance first in Europe. And the first financial crisis occurred in Sweden in 1991-92. But a lot of the infrastructure of the post-war Swedish welfare state remains. But there's very, very little of a dynamic socialist culture around the Swedish Workers' Party. And that's true all the more of the German. So, it's easy to talk of Norway as the example. If you look at, or Canada as the example, if you look at Medicare, universal public health care. But there's not much to look at if Norway or Canada is your example in terms of what you're trying to do now, which is build dynamic socialist organizations at the base. In that sense, what you're doing is blowing past anything that now exists in Canada or in Sweden, for that matter.
You're listening to Revolutions Per Minute on WBAI in New York City, broadcasting at 99.5 FM and streaming on your favorite podcast app. You were just hearing from Leo Panitch, who unfortunately recently passed away, and he had given this talk earlier in 2020 to the North Brooklyn DSA night school. And we just want to give our listeners some time to call in and ask some questions, whether it's about what happened today down in DC, it's about socialist organization, DSA specifically, and we have Justin with us if you want to respond to any of the comments he made in our last segment. So that number is 212-209-2877. Again, that number is 212-209-2877. And I know we had a caller on the line, so I think let's go to whoever that is right now. You are live on Revolutions Per Minute on WBAI. What's your name and what's your comment and or question?
Hi, this is Ben from Brooklyn. I just wanted to disagree with what one of the hosts there said earlier about being anti-fascist by locking down on buses or preventing hotel occupancy, because that's their First Amendment rights. As much as I disagree with them, you can't. It's impossible to restrict people from getting on a bus, restrict them from organizing. I think you got to organize stronger than them. It's just shocking today to see them, the problem, like they have a right to gather in front. It's shocking to see that the security was so lax that they could just bulldoze Capitol Police. That's completely insane. But I just wanted to point that out. I can't really tell a whole group of people. There's no way you can shut down people's ability to communicate via social media or reserve buses or hotel rooms, and that's it.
So I want to respond to that. Maybe I'll give Justin a chance if he wants to chime in. But I think this is. I appreciate the call in and the comment, and I see what you're saying. But I think we have to understand that the First Amendment is about state power. So it's what Amy was saying earlier in the show isn't that the government should come in and shut down all those operations. She's talking about working class organizations combating this and putting pressure on these other institutions to not give their resources over to fascists. So it's not that we're demanding, it's not that Amy is talking about demanding the state do something, as she was very, very clear that the way that the state, especially the capitalist state, is currently organized, it is not the ally in the anti-fascist struggle. So it's not, I don't think this really revolves around the First Amendment. It's a question of what tactics and strategies the socialist movement, of which the American state is fundamentally opposed to, what kind of tactics and strategies can be utilized to disempower a growingly dangerous fascist movement. Justin, do you have anything you want to add there?
No, you said what I would have said. Thanks, Jack.
All right, great. Well, I appreciate you agree with me. Do we have any other callers on the line?
Yes, you do.
All right. Well, you are live on WBA and Revolutions Per Minute. What's your name and question or comment?
This is John from New Jersey. I have some good news. I have to agree with that young fella there that says you can't really kind of try to silence these people. That's not going to work. It's just going to make it worse by trying to drive them underground. They're just going to become more violent, feeling they're not being heard, that speech being taken away. The other thing is that I heard that the BLM and MAGA were playing nice together upstate New York to fight the mandatory vaccines. Now, if we can get everybody on board to figure out that the billionaires are onto us all over the world and they know we're coming for them now, and Bill Gates and those guys are just going to lock us down because then we can't get together because you're on tier 4 in a lockdown because of some fake PCR test that's telling you're all sick. You know what I'm saying?
So I'm gonna have to.
This whole pandemic is going to come collapsing down, and everybody's going to be voted all over the world against the billionaires.
I'm sorry. I'm going to have to cut you off there because to be honest, I appreciate you calling into the program, but what you're spewing is nonsense. The notion that this pandemic is like some sort of conspiracy concocted by the billionaires does not actually fit into the reality of a class struggle as it is happening now. In fact, a large amount of American billionaires are behind things like anti-vax movements, or pushing for reopening, or trying to really take away healthcare precautions, to really throw workers into the fire. To me, it's pure nonsense that this notion that this is what the billionaires are happy that it misses the whole picture here. Capitalism is the reason this pandemic has come about, because of factory farming in China, international supply chains, this kind of large system that enables the spread. But the notion that this is some conspiracy concocted from atop and that they've wanted to shut down the economy, when this has been absolutely destructive to the process of accumulation, which is necessary for capital. So we have to, just because there's been a number of billionaires who have utilized the crisis to their benefit, which they do with every single thing that happens, doesn't mean we have to take a conspiratorial mindset. We need to understand the various contradictions that have kind of brought together this moment. And the reality is, it's actually working class organizers who are fighting back against being forced into the workplace, and that wearing a mask isn't some sort of fascist or billionaire conspiracy. It's about keeping working people safe. Justin, is there anything you want to add to
that? Not really. No, I mean, I think what the caller was starting to get at about, BLM and MAGA uniting. I was interested to hear where that was going, but it ended up not really going anywhere good. I'm not really commenting so much on what they said because I thought it was nonsense, but it made me think about what happened last night with, MAGA and Proud Boys fighting cops in the street. And I was like, that's interesting. Why the infighting, guys? But no, that's just a little non sequitur. I thought that was nonsense. Let's move along.
All right, yeah, let's take the next caller, and let's focus on something other than conspiracy theories. Let's get into the material reality. We're living in a world where working class power is being crushed and threatened, and we're not going to prevent any. We're not going to overthrow the ruling class by not taking a vaccine that prevents you from dying from a deadly disease. So let's go to the next caller. You are live on Revolutions Per Minute on WBAI.
In vein of solidarity, you had mentioned the solidarity and organizing. I wondered if Stacey Abrams, with her excellent skills of, getting so upset at being sort of cheated out of the governor's title by Governor Brian Kemp of Georgia. She organized like that, got 2 Democrats elected, and one of them sounded pretty much like a social democrat to me. And so I'm wondering, for a person who can in fact speak and organize and get people more into the idea that working people are a class and so forth, as your guest had been speaking about. Can you incorporate, or are you trying to reach out to Stacey Abrams and ask her if she would like to, at least within the Democratic Party, lead some of what you're trying to do? Can you incorporate? Can you include her?
Thank you very much Thank you so much for that question, Justin. Since I've kind of dove in first on these last 2, do you want to take a shot at this?
Yeah, sure. So we're not doing anything with Stacey Abrams, but I can say that like Stacey Abrams, I think, is clued into something that I think many people on the left and progressives are also clued into, which is the fact that we live in a very, very, very anti-democratic society. Part of that anti-democratic nature of that society is white supremacy, and that takes form you see in Georgia and all over the country. A heavy amount of voter suppression. So, Jack talked earlier about you were talking about Reconstruction a bit, and how it was kind of a real kind of like flourishing of democracy that the country talked a lot of mess about but never really lived up to. And I think when you look at what and I also would caution against like giving so much credit to Stacey Abrams, though I do give her credit. A lot of people went down to Georgia to organize to make what happened happen. They had like unprecedented turnout from Black and Latino voters, which yes, Stacey Abrams was a part of, but there were a lot of organizations and organizers that helped make that happen. I think that what that says is, we have to be very invested in hitting every door, making every phone call to every number that we can get, and having conversations with people about the world that we want. Not just about, let's get this person elected, but like, I don't necessarily believe, okay, yeah, the Democrats are going to now have their trifecta. They have the House, they have the Senate, they have the presidency. I'm under no illusions that that's going to make everything great, but it's an opportunity. And we have to talk to people about that opportunity and what it's going to take for us to get what we deserve from that opportunity. And we only do that by building with each other, by getting into struggle with each other, around something tangible that affects our everyday lives, something material. And like, people, Warnock and Ossoff and even Biden in the end realized, wait, $2,000 checks, that's something we can fight over. That's something material. maybe we should get behind that. And they did. I think that worked out pretty well for them because that's going to affect people's lives immediately in the positive. We have to keep making arguments like that to people and bring them into struggle. And as you get into struggle, you win.
I think that's a perfect way to end this episode. And I just want to thank you so much, Justin, for joining us. I want to thank the North Brooklyn Political Education for sending those clips from Leo Panitch. And I want to thank Amy Wilson for coming on earlier. Just to one final note, and I think this is really what Justin is hitting on. If we want to, actually challenge the power of the ruling class, of the billionaires, of people like Bill Gates, it's going to require mass organization, tenants unions, workplace unions, other community organizations, media institutions like here at WBAI. So I want to thank so much all our guests, our callers, our listeners, and we will be back next week, Wednesday at 9 p.m. Thank you, and we will see you out in the streets.